Hi, this is the philosophical angle. The purpose of the philosophical angle is to analyze the nature and essence of concepts being used in current media. This week, we're going to discuss the nature and essence of political correctness. Is political correctness good or bad for America? And let's talk about it. With me is my co-host, Rick Samuelson. Rick graduated from Yale and is a venture capitalist on the West Coast. Good to see you, Rick.
Good to see you.
Okay, so let's start by pulling up a little diagram here. And starting with our discussion of political correctness. Okay, so the decision-making process of political correctness is bringing us such results as the Syrian migrants, Obamacare, allowing Iran to have the bomb, Common Core education. Also, other types of political correctness, the incidents and riots in Baltimore and Ferguson, where the criminals run wild, and it comes out with kind of a perverse result that the cops are bad, not the rioters. There are many examples of political correctness, so we're going to ask whether this is good or bad for America. Well, first, to initiate, we need to understand what is political correctness. We need to define it. Well, I'd like to put forth that political correctness is that all values should be equal in their outcome. And this is going to cause a problem, and we'll discuss that a little bit later. But, so from the political correctness that all should be equal in outcome, we come to conclude that equality produces fairness, which is the objective of political correctness. And to a progressive Democrat, fairness is the paramount and ultimate virtue. And to be fair, all must be equal. Now, of course, there's an exception to this, and that's the political class. They are exempt from this virtue of being equal. And it's kind of amazing that Congress always does exempt itself from any oppressive laws and regulations that it deems inconvenient for itself, which is obviously an outlandish hypocrisy. So where are the ideas for this ultimate virtue of equality in outcome? Where does it come from? Well, there's a lot of texts in history that have discussed this. Utopia by Sir Thomas More, Plato's Republic, 1984. Communist Manifesto, which produced such political operations as the USSR, Mao's Communist China, Pol Pot in Cambodia. The problem with all these manifestations of these types of utopia is that none of it ever worked. Secondly, all require a diminishment of individual freedom. That is, they have to take the freedom of the individual, of the citizenry of that country, and take it away and keep it at the government level. So we stated there a little bit ago that there was a problem. We postulated that Political correctness indicates that all values are or should be equal. And this problem is that nothing is equal or the same in nature. Nothing is equal or the same as anything else. This is the nature of life. No life entities are the same. All are individual entities, and they're all different. For example, all children are different. Some are brighter than others. Some are more athletic than others. But they are all different. Some philosophies are more problematic than others. The philosophies of Hitler, Pol Pot, Mao, Stalin, Lenin, and others they're just not as good. It didn't work. But some philosophies and the essence and nature of others are good. Jesus, Bonhoeffer, Martin Luther King, George Washington. The common theme in these examples is the equality of outcome driven by political correctness. From Mao, Stalin, Lenin, and others, they have a common theme in this equality of outcome. Obviously, Lenin, Stalin, Mao, Pol Pot, that theme came from Marx's Communist Manifesto. Hitler is slightly different. He wanted purity of race, so his equality was racial, as well as he was a fascist also. The political correctness is enabled by all rights retained by the government, and so Pol Pot, Hitler, Stalin, Mao, they are all facilitated by taking any rights of the citizenry and bringing it back to the government level, so the government owns all rights as they ruled. Any rights given to the people of their society was by their behest. And so the penultimate political correctness can dictate equality of outcome. And thus the individual does not even have the right to his own life. And thus the decimation of the societies of Pol Pot, and Stalin, Lenin, Mao, Hitler. Probably together they probably killed about 100 million people. Mao himself probably had executed 50 million. So, the conclusion: political correctness takes away individual rights. Therefore, freedom is diminished for the individual as freedom for government increases. Thus, PC is bad for the individual. That is bad for the citizenry of any country, and therefore bad for the U.S. population, for the U.S. individuals. So, coming back over here, we were discussing the philosophies of these killers, and we're giving some more examples. Religions, there are some religions that are better than others. Some humans that are more ethical than others. And some people are definitely more evil than others, as we see in the individuals that we've enumerated here. And there's an inequality in both goodness and evil in this world. You're probably wondering, what are the definitions of good and evil now that I've brought them up? It's really not the subject of this of our political correctness, but we'll give it here anyway, briefly, because good is that which brings us up away from misery, and evil is the unethical action and unethical objective. In other words, the two-dimensional unethicality. So enough of this diagram for right now. Let's go to Rick and let's ask him, what do you think about political correctness in the United States? Is it good for the United States? Are we heading in the right direction?
Well, let me start by saying that I think Donald Trump has done an enormous service to the public in exploding a number of myths surrounding how far you can push against this prevailing ethic of political correctness. And to give Ben Carson his due, he's done some of the same. So even if over the last how many years we've seen this gradual hardening of views in academia, the media, as to what can be said versus what can't be said in public, there are, at least in the election cycle, a large element of dissent, and voters are obviously responding to it. It's no accident that Donald Trump is as popular as he is amongst the Republican base. He's arguably the least PC of any of the candidates, and it's striking a chord with a large number of people who've had enough of this stuff. The problem I see with the PC movement is that it's so insidious. They've gradually infiltrated the universities, gradually infiltrated the media, and incrementally made more and more topics or ways of airing views unacceptable in the public. And meanwhile, people who work for a living and hold regular jobs and are busy with their families have been tolerating this over time because, frankly, they have other responsibilities. Not that they've not been annoyed by it, they have. But actually taking arms, so to speak, against this widespread movement has, at least until now, been viewed as impractical or too much trouble or whatever. But I think now we're going to see in this election cycle the whole PC notion being pretty directly challenged, and I think it's a good thing.
Any examples of how Trump has interjected his way into the advancement of PC?
Well, the most obvious recently was his call for a ban on Muslim immigration in the United States. Of course, the media went wild. He was attacked on numerous sides, but I mean, if you look at the facts, he has a very, very legitimate point. If the Sarnav brothers had never been allowed to immigrate to the United States, we wouldn't have had that Boston massacre. And they, of course, were refugees. I mean, that's just a fact. Similarly with the San Bernardino killings, the wife in particular, who was a recent immigrant to the United States. You can't argue with those facts. And, those facts are very inconvenient from the PC perspective. They don't align with their narrative. And the narrative, of course, is that basically we should foster open borders and all immigrants are wonderful. And if a few Americans get killed now and then, well, in the cause of achieving diversity, which is somehow a greater good. And I mean, if you examine the facts surrounding that particular issue, the notion that any Americans would be killed by any immigrants is absolutely intolerable. It's a kind of evil, actually.
Right.
That commentators would contemplate that as a legitimate point of view is a kind of evil.
That's right. Because the objective is equality, and who cares if some people have to be snuffed out in order to obtain this objective.
Yes, and that's where your point about the many horrific historical precedents is so relevant. Quite honestly, when Hitler started out, he was viewed as a hero, right?
Yes.
He was standing up to the French. He was standing up to the Treaty of Versailles. He was rebuilding the country, and Germany arose out of the ashes of World War I to become the most powerful economy in Europe. And then, of course, incrementally, the more horrific elements of his philosophy were brought to bear with horrendous consequences. And I guess many of us observing what's happened with PC have this nagging feeling that, it just doesn't end here, right? This incremental push toward shutting down free speech or delimiting it so severely that one can't really debate is unnerving. And it's high time that it was challenged.
Speaking of Trump, I heard that England is going to vote on whether he should be disallowed into the country of England because of his stance on immigration and Muslims coming into America.
Yes, I read that as well, and I think the PC movement is alive and well in Europe, probably even stronger in parts of Europe than it is in the United States.
It would certainly be an historical first to see that if Trump were to become president, that he would be outlawed in visiting England. Certainly, that certainly would be a first to see a head of a state barred from being able to visit an ally. So, what do you think on the universities? Are the universities really, are they the center driving force, the epicenter of PC, or is it Capitol Hill? Where is the epicenter of PC?
I think the most extreme versions of political correctness are found today on university campuses, and there are instances of it at many schools. The whole notion of safe zones and requiring an environment where microaggressions aren't tolerated, and microaggressions apparently consist of minor changes in terminology or phrasing that could, very obliquely refer to one's race or some other feature of a person and make them feel uncomfortable. We don't see that degree of sensitivity yet on Capitol Hill, but it's moving in that direction, and certainly with the media, it's moving in that direction. And so I think where the PC movement wants to end up is found initially in the universities, and they essentially want to expand that creed, if you will, across all of society, including business, including government and including all elements of one's life.
Yeah, and at
The churches too. The churches too.
Uh-huh. How so in the churches?
Well, I don't know if you follow some of the statements by leading members of the churches, but in the Episcopal Church, for example, some of the bishops were applauding Obama's recent executive order concerning gun control, and so you wonder to yourself, how is it that the churches have gotten so much behind the progressive movement? Another instance, it concerns the Congregational Church in Seattle. That for months they had pasted across the front of the church, living wage for all. So they've aligned themselves with the unions. So in aligning themselves so strongly, not all churches, but many churches, certainly the Episcopal Church, which I attend, the churches have also bought into the PC culture, if you will. Even though progressives, by and large, are kind of anti-Christian.
Right. So, we talked about Trump being anti-PC and gave some examples. What about Ted Cruz? Is his popularity also tied to the same thing? I mean, those are the two front runners.
I think not to the same degree Donald Trump's is. Ted Cruz is obviously more guarded in his statements, but I think his appeal stems primarily from the fact that he has been willing to attack many of his fellow Republicans, establishment Republicans, and he has been willing to go on record opposing compromises that he just can't tolerate because they're not conservative enough vis-a-vis the Democrats. And so I think voters view him as, of the many candidates out there, one of the few who really sticks by conservative principles, and they appreciate that.
Yeah, I think so. Didn't he give some speeches in the Senate that stuck by his principles, by which he was elected in Texas? He got up there and stuck by his by what he said in the campaign, stuck with it, and was maligned by the regular conservative mainstream, by Mitch McConnell and others in the Senate for it.
Yeah, reportedly, basically all of the Senate hates him, so that's probably his biggest source of support amongst the electorate. If they hate him, he must be good.
Exactly. Okay. Rick, we're going to have to wrap it up here, and so I want to thank you for joining us, and we'll see you all next week on The Philosophical Angle.
Thank you.